This time, on combat ships. The cutthroat world of river warfare.
She didn't fear her own recapture. She didn't fear her own death.
Small boats with global impact.
As long as I have their six and they have my six and we're communicating very clear and very loud and making sure, hey, he's coming up on your left, he's coming up on your right, he's coming up on your starboard, your port. As long as that communication key piece is still there, then we're gonna make it home every day.
And cruise in the thick of battle.
The casualty rate for a PBR sailor was high. There's nowhere to hide when you're out in the open water. There's only limited armor.
When I look back, and there's nobody standing back there, so I figure they're all dead.
Combat ships. Fast. Effective.
His orders were to find the British and to pick a fight.
Going right to the heart of the battle.
The Marines have always thought of themselves as the spear point of United States military power.
Their whole doctrine of combat was to go fast, hit hard, get it over with in a hurry.
Combat ships have changed the world.
She gained her freedom. Now she's going down the river with an army. She was like, we're about to show you what we're working with.
Thanks to clever design, raw firepower, and the heroism of their crews.
The rule of thumb on a frigate is you can lose 2 spaces and stay afloat. But if you lose a third, you go to Davy Jones's locker in a hurry.
On June 1st, 1863, 2 Union gunboats made their way down the Combahee River in South Carolina. They carried soldiers, many of them freed enslaved men, on a mission to destroy Confederate property and to liberate others. It was a daring river raid.
The principal infantry unit that conducted the raid was the 2nd South Carolina Volunteer Infantry of African descent. And they were going on a raid here to actually get more people who would enlist in the regiment, to capture more people.
Every slave that leaves his workplace gives, as Lincoln would say, more horsepower for the Union to achieve victory.
Colonel James Montgomery, a fierce abolitionist, was in charge of the raid.
Montgomery was very intent on causing pain to Confederate civilians, those who had property, who owned slaves, to change, to affect the economy and the psychology of the Southerners to try to drive them out of the war.
Montgomery's plan was to launch hit-and-run attacks on ports and plantations all along South Carolina's rivers. He relied on intel from a key Union spy, former slave Harriet Tubman, already famous for her work liberating people, using the so-called Underground Railroad.
Harriet was so successful because she was fearless. She didn't fear her own recapture. She didn't fear her own death. She was willing to risk it all to help other people.
There's an image of Harriet Tubman. It's considered the earliest known image, but she stares down the camera with this defiant look. And I like to think of her as an iron fist in a velvet glove.
Harriet had a violent and traumatic childhood. At age 6, she was taken away from her parents and sold to Maryland slave owners.
She suffered a lot of brutality, a lot of violence at the hands primarily of female slaveholders as she worked in the house, weaving and watching children.
You never knew when you woke up in the morning whether you were going to live or die. and that death could come at the hands of an enslaver who would not be punished by law because they had the right to kill you, or it could come as a result of the labor that you had to deal with every day.
Tubman escaped to freedom in 1849. When the Civil War broke out 12 years later, Harriet served with the Union Army, working first as a nurse and then as a spy. Now, her bravery and contacts were the key to Montgomery's guerrilla war.
She was able to talk to men and women and get intel on how the Confederates were moving about, where people stored their weaponry and ammunition.
She recruited men to form her ring of spy scouts and pilots, and some men who not only knew the rivers but had personal knowledge and personal ties to the plantations that were going to be raided.
Harriet wanted to liberate as many as possible.
She gained her freedom. Now she's going down the river with an army. She was like, you know what, I'm bad. And we're about to show you what we're working with.
At the start of the Civil War, the Union blockaded the Confederate coast and launched campaigns up the Mississippi and key coastal rivers, isolating the South. The Union Navy only had 42 ships, so they embarked on a massive naval expansion, building new vessels and converting merchant steamers into combat ships. One of them was a former Boston ferry boat turned river raider, the John Adams. With steam-powered paddle wheels on its sides, the John Adams was an unusual-looking combat ship, but it had become a formidable gunboat.
The guns that were mounted on the John Adams would have been very, very effective against any infantry and light artillery that was on shore that could be moved around, field guns, as they were called.
The John Adams had a 10 and 20-pound gun and was equipped with large cannons taken from an artillery unit.
John Adams also was carrying 2 howitzers from the 3rd Rhode Island heavy artillery. And those were probably 12-pound guns, about 3.5-inch guns. So they were highly effective against infantry as well.
In 1863, Tubman, Montgomery, and 250 troops took the John Adams and a steam tug, the Harriet A. Weed, up the Combahee River from Union-held Beaufort, South Carolina. The Confederate Navy had only a few frail and poorly armed wooden combat ships on the rivers. Any opposition the John Adams encountered would be from the shore. Early in the morning of June 2nd, the 2 ships approached a bank on the Combahee River known as Fields Point. They were spotted by Confederate soldiers.
When they first report gunboats on the river, their commander, they send word back, and he tells them to go back, that there had been several false alarms and that there couldn't be gunboats on the river, basically. So the Confederates failed to respond immediately at their first opportunity.
As they approached, the Union boats let the enslaved people know they were coming.
They blew the steam whistle, and the U.S. flag was flying. The stars and stripes were flying and flapping.
It would be awe-inspiring for the enslaved people because that ship meant freedom. It would be fearful for those Confederate soldiers serving on the shore.
On board the John Adams, the troops checked their weapons and prepared to land, deep in Confederate territory. Some of the enslaved workers were already in the fields. Many ran toward their liberators.
It's thrilling. It's freedom. It's what they've been waiting for.
Meanwhile, the soldiers targeted the plantation properties.
They were burning barns, burning the planters' houses, all the outbuildings associated with it. They tried to burn every structure except for the houses of the enslaved people.
They confiscate the livestock, they confiscate the rice, and they opened the floodgates to flood the rice fields with salt water and prevent planters from growing rice there.
An 80-year-old man who escaped enslavement wrote an account of the raid.
Throughout his account, he calls the black soldiers, and I quote, "de black soldiers so presumptuous." He says, "First thing I know, there was a barn, 10,000 bushel rough rice, all in a blaze. Then Massa's great house, all crackling up the roof." And he was unrepentant about the soldiers' actions. He proclaimed, didn't care for seeing blaze. Lord, Massa didn't care nothing at all. He didn't look back at his former slaveholders' property going up in flames. He said, "I was going to the boat."
Over 700 enslaved people are rescued that day.
The people who were rescued are put aboard the boats, the U.S. boats, and taken to Beaufort.
What I can imagine is that for them, there was a sense of joy, a sense of deep appreciation, a sense of concern, a sense of confusion, because you've now gained your freedom, but yet the war still isn't done.
Scores of liberated men joined the Union cause.
It was said that on the Combahee River raid, they took the men out of the rice fields, they took the hoes out of their hands, they put muskets in them, and they went on to fight for the freedom of others.
The successful Combahee River raid enhanced Harriet Tubman's reputation as an American icon.
You have Harriet Tubman, who risked her life on the Underground Railroad, freeing approximately 70 people in 13 trips back into bondage to bring people out. She comes down to Beaufort, South Carolina, risking her freedom, risking her life and her personal safety to free people she doesn't even know.
She belongs on the Mount Rushmore of the nation because she changed the nation. She helped bring this nation out of the bondage of slavery. She helped define freedom.
The Combahee raid was possible because of the Union Navy's domination of the rivers. One of their impressive combat ships survives. The American Civil War saw the creation of a remarkable new class of combat ship. One of these gunboats has been recovered from the depths of the Yazoo River, a tributary of the Mississippi. This is the heavily armored, ironclad Leviathan, the USS Cairo.
Since the USS Cairo came to rest in a largely oxygen-free environment covered with silt and mud for over 100 years, this ship was in remarkable shape. As you see the hull behind me here, that white oak is original. That's the historic fabric of this vessel.
The Mississippi River is America's most important waterway. At the outbreak of the Civil War, Union forces knew they had to control it.
Number one, the capture of the Mississippi would divide the Confederacy. In other words, Arkansas, Texas, part of Louisiana were isolated from the East Coast. Number two, all those businessmen on the Great Lakes, on the upper Mississippi, Illinois, so forth, they were reliant on moving their finished goods and agricultural products down the Mississippi and out to sea. It was a great way for the Union to have, complete control of their economic destiny.
With only 42 ships in the Union Navy, they had to get the boats in the water fast.
You have to realize that a ship like the Cairo was laid down in October of 1861 and was commissioned by the end of January 1862. That is fabulous. And it gave the Federals this tremendous advantage to work against the static Confederate defenses.
The Cairo was one of 7 City-class gunboats. It was steam-powered and propelled by massive paddle wheels, protected by 2.5 inches of iron armor. Naval architect Samuel Pooke designed them specifically for the rivers of the South.
You don't want a deep-hulled or V-shaped ship operating here in the inland shallow waterways. They're vulnerable to sandbars and snags. Even with the Cairo's 880-ton displacement, a ship like this only drafted 6 feet of water. It was euphemistically said that the Cairo and her sister ships could navigate in a heavy dew.
Sailors nicknamed the unusual-looking river raiders Pooke turtles. Life for the crews was tough.
There is nothing romantic about serving on a ship like this. Life below decks was hard. It was hot, it was chaotic, it was uncomfortable. These ships were not designed for creature comforts. From the heat from the boilers operating 24 hours, 7 days a week, it was well over 100 degrees.
The ship's sole purpose was to bring maximum firepower onto the South's rivers.
The Cairo is first and foremost a gun platform. With few creature comforts afforded for the crew, the Cairo is designed around 13 heavy cannons, from 32-pound smoothbores to 8-inch smoothbore cannons to a 30-pound rifled Parrott cannon, right up to 42-pound Army rifles.
The 8-inch guns were state-of-the-art. They fired lethal explosive shells.
They were really deadly because when they blew up, they created a ragged hole, and then added to that, they sent wooden splinters, iron splinters, and then sparks. And as we all know, sparks and wooden gunboats don't work well together. If you were just some Confederate troops and you came across a City-class gunboat, you were in trouble because they had range, they had speed, and if you're just infantry or cavalry formations, then you would not do very well.
Just off my shoulder here, you see one of the 6 32-pound cannons. Though relatively early design, the 32-pounder was still formidable. It can fire a 32-pound projectile just over a mile, or just over 1,900 yards.
When the ship's guns fired, the cramped armored gunboat was a terrifying place for the crew.
It was not uncommon, after a long battle, for the eardrums to burst of crew members and blood to be trickling down the sides of their head, just because of the concussion, the pressure in the confines of the gallery here, or what we call the gun deck on the City-class boats.
Obviously, they had no ear protection. When you fired a gun, you're supposed to cup one ear, open your mouth, and lean away. So that's not very effective.
The crew of the USS Cairo were used to river battles, but were unprepared for an unseen enemy. The City-class gunboats quickly became a thorn in the side of the Confederacy, disrupting supply lines and bombarding shore positions. But it was at the Battle of Memphis that the Cairo made her name.
The Confederate river defense fleet is destroyed during the Battle of Memphis as all the citizens of Memphis are lining the riverbank, saying, "Huzzah for our guys," and all of a sudden, our guys get destroyed and our town is captured.
Despite the impressive design and firepower of the City-class, the gunboats had a flaw.
The only portion of this ship that offers any armored protection is going to be above the waterline.
Pooke's turtles had a hard shell, but under the water, the Cairo was just like any wooden ship. On December 12th, 1862, the Cairo was patrolling a tributary of the Mississippi, the Yazoo River. Unknown to her crew, spies were lurking on the bank. Outgunned on the water, the Confederates developed new technology to offset the Union's dominance of rivers and seas. They deployed a new kind of weapon.
The Confederates come up with the concept to create mines, which during the Civil War we call torpedoes. Ergo, you have either generally a wooden cask that's been sealed with tar and so forth.
The Confederates submerged the cask, packed full of gunpowder, and attached by a copper wire to the shore, a battery provided a charge to ignite the powder. On December 12, 1862, the Cairo steamed past the Confederate spies, just as they hoped. The primitive but effective torpedo exploded.
You would give the rebel yell, I'm sure, when you saw it happen.
The crew would have scrambled to control flooding first of all. They did, in fact, man the pumps, but it soon became apparent it was a losing battle. The very real hazard, however, was the cold water of the Yazoo River coming in contact with the hot boilers. These boilers had a propensity to explode, and escaping hot gases would scald and kill the crew. Soon after realizing it was a losing battle and the water was starting to inundate the ship and it was lost, the crew scrambled off the stricken Cairo.
Miraculously, there was no loss of life. All 251 crew members were rescued. An eyewitness sketched the scene.
The sinking of the Cairo that morning set precedent. It has the dubious distinction of the first warship ever to be sunk by electronically detonated mine.
The defeated Cairo slid into the murky depths of the Yazoo, but not quite deep enough for the U.S. Navy. She had something the enemy desperately needed: guns.
Since the USS Cairo came to rest in only 36 feet of water, the high smokestacks were still visible. And Confederates operating in this area would investigate a site like this very quickly. They were after one thing: the 13 heavy cannons on this ship. They were very valuable indeed. They could be recovered, cleaned up, mounted on new carriages, and perched high atop the bluffs here at Vicksburg, offering continued resistance to the U.S. Navy. So with the stacks sticking up out of the water, the USS Pittsburgh, a sister ship of the Cairo, steamed forward and knocked those stacks down, thereby concealing the USS Cairo in her watery grave for over 100 years.
In 1964, a team of historians lifted the Cairo from the depths. It was clear the mud and silt of the river had kept her in remarkably good condition. Artifacts from the crew included a pocket watch, a set of dominoes, the bosun's whistle, a Marine's hat insignia, and a food tin with the sailor's initials scratched on the side. She is an historically important Civil War survivor.
You actually can see and feel yourself as you look at that gunboat and recognize the fear or the concern that you would have as a Confederate soldier facing that type of gunboat. It would have been fearsome.
100 years later, American riverine forces fought a very different battle in a foreign land at faster speed and with very different challenges. Vietnam, early 1965. The United States is struggling to contain well-armed and well-supplied North Vietnamese forces pushing into South Vietnam. The Communists used two highly effective supply routes to the south. On land, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and on water, the many canals and rivers, especially in the Mekong Delta. It soon becomes clear that the design of existing American vessels was not up to the task of cutting off the supply line. They can't navigate the shallow channels. The U.S. riverine forces, known as the Brown Water Navy, needed something out of the ordinary.
It required an entirely new class range of vessels because the Navy had not fought a riverine campaign in a century. And that meant, of course, as usual, they're caught with inappropriate equipment for what the challenge represented, so they had to start from scratch.
In a moment of genius, the Navy took the design of a civilian pleasure boat and quickly turned it into a combat ship. the Patrol Boat River, known as the PBR. A surviving PBR is moored on Muskegon Lake in Michigan. The boat is revolutionary. It doesn't have a propeller. It has engineering more associated with hot tubs.
Using technology adapted by the Jacuzzi brothers, and I'm not making that up, they were able to contract manufacture of 30-foot long fiberglass boats that had only a 2-foot draft, that didn't have to rely on rudders and propellers that could get snagged on all kinds of obstructions in that kind of environment. It simply used a water jet to draw in the water and shoot it out under pressure out the back, and these were tremendously maneuverable and rather swift boats. Could you think of a wider range of application from a hot tub jet to a riverine warship?
The water jet pumps forced pressurized water through stern nozzles at 96,000 gallons a minute.
This boat was truly unique in the fact that it gave people the opportunity to operate in shallow waters, to take the fight to the enemy, because they thought, oh, I can go hide here. Those big ships can't come up here.
The PBR Mark I was first deployed in Vietnam in March 1966. It quickly made an impact. The PBR's ability to penetrate shallow rivers helped cut North Vietnamese supply lines. But while they could get upriver, it soon became clear that PBR fiberglass hulls offered little protection in combat.
The casualty rate for a PBR sailor was high. There's nowhere to hide when you're out in the open water. There's only limited armor.
So it basically came to alertness, speed, and the ability to hit back as fast as you can with machine guns and mortars.
With limited protection, the PBR crews relied on their weapons. At the front were twin 50 caliber machine guns.
Most common weapon in the back is the AF-50 cal, but often there was a 60mm naval mortar. They also had a Mark 18 grenade launcher. Mark 18 is hand cranked, fired 40 mite grenade rounds like you see guys fire shoulder-fired grenade launchers, fired the same round. It evolved into the Mark 19, which is a fully automatic grenade launcher, which I served behind and crewed in Afghanistan a few times, and was truly, truly a unique piece of equipment that started out for PBRs.
In Vietnam, Keith Gottschall was responsible for his PBR's engines, but knew the twin 50 cals well.
I had to know the insides and outs. In fact, that one night we were in a firefight and mine jammed on me. I took it apart, unjammed it, put it back together in the dark, and got it firing again.
PBR crews carried out a variety of combat tasks. Tours were often stressful.
Sometimes you might insert ground troops, might take a doctor into a village, check sampans, check river traffic, night patrols. Nobody's supposed to be on the river, so you're always on the lookout for someone that was there. So, tense nights, yeah.
PBRs were one of Vietnam's toughest duties. This one was restored by a charity Robert started, Operation Black Sheep.
Our goal is to honor, celebrate, serve veterans, and preserve history. And by giving rides, allowing people to experience the actual boat, not just look at it as a static display, but go out, smell it, hear it, spend some time beside some replica weapons. It just gives you a unique immersion learning.
Robert, a veteran of the war in Afghanistan who suffers from PTSD, felt he could help PBR Vietnam vets with similar issues.
Me and Robert have a lot of long talks, and it's just nice to get stuff off your chest. You know, I don't talk about really bad stuff because I don't want to, but he'll say something and I'm thinking, you know, I experienced the same thing. I get where you're going.
They enlisted, many were drafted and served our country in a time when it wasn't popular to do so. And almost all of them that I've met were proud of their service, were proud of what they did, and came home to a community that didn't want to hear their stories or didn't want to hear all the positive things that they had done in another country. And because of that, I just always had felt like I related to them.
Keith Gottschall returned from Vietnam in civilian clothes and in the middle of the night.
I got home and I put it behind me. I remember my dad got angry with me one time that I didn't share with him what I went through, and I feel bad about that. He probably deserved to know some things. Excuse me. And I had bits and pieces here and there, but I feel the worst for my parents that I did not share too much. But that's how Robert's organization has helped me so much. You can share stories, and you don't get into deep detail, but you can share stories like with Dave and I and John and I, and it helps. It helps a lot.
After their experiences in Vietnam, the first time getting on board the restored PBR can be difficult.
They cranked up those engines, and I don't know what a nanosecond is or knowledge, but I'm telling you, it was like, just like that. When the vibrations come up my feet, I was in Vietnam, and I started crying.
This is 4-3, Region 5. What's your story? No? This is 4-3. Do you have the smoke on the beach? It's still affirmative. Roger, that's the...
Each veteran has their harrowing war story. In 1967, Dave Kelly was the engine man on a PBR. One day, on a river patrol, they came under attack from Viet Cong, armed with automatic weapons and rockets. Dave was manning the forward gun.
As soon as I turned the gun, the second rocket hit the bow, and I got wounded in the legs. And then the radar dome that's above me here, the third rocket hit the radar dome and blew me right down into the gun turret. And I jumped back up and I tried to shoot again, and my guns wouldn't work. And I looked back, and there's nobody standing back there. And there was supposed to be 4 guys standing back there. So I figured they were all dead. I didn't really know. The boat now is going full speed ahead with nobody back there, just me, and I started crawling out of the gun turret to go back to drive the boat, and then everybody started popping up out of the thing. Then we went to some village, maybe 15, 20 minutes away. And as soon as the bow hit the bank, helicopter landed with a big red cross on it, and that was my first helicopter ride and last. It's quiet up there other than the helicopter blade and the motor running. And you're thinking, boy, that's peaceful down there. And then it was like thinking, well, half an hour ago, somebody's trying to kill me. That's how quick it changed, you know.
Let me know when you finish your run, and we'll come in behind you there.
The injured and exhausted PBR crews often depended on a veteran of World War II and Korea. The landing ship, tank, or LST took on a new role, not assisting invasions, but as a mothership for PBRs. The LST was a lifeline for the river crews. Today, one survivor, LST-393, is moored next to Robert's PBR.
They'd pull up alongside, tie up, get their fuel, go in, get their food, spend time, and they're 12 hours down or 12 hours up, depending on what you were running that day.
This type of LST and the type that was used in Vietnam would hold about 280,000 gallons of fuel. So I'm quite sure, and that was diesel fuel, and the PBRs were diesel also. So there was plenty of diesel fuel to go around for everybody.
They were able to put them in the cargo hold or in the tank deck, and they lifted them out of the tank deck with winches and arms and swung them around and dropped them right into the water. They could take them off the water the same way, bring it up, turn it, drop it into the tank deck. The LST cruised right up to the river mouth, dropped the PBRs off, and PBRs were right into the river doing their job.
This single PBR has changed lives, all thanks to Robert's vision.
He's made people be aware of PBRs. And it's brought a lot of us old farts out of the closet to puff out our chest and talk to people about it and be proud.
I think he's a hell of a good guy. He's dedicated. If I had to go on another battle, I'd like to have him beside me because I trust him with my life. I really do.
It helped me to explain to my family, this is what I was on. Robert took us on a ride, and you know, it helped. Oh, this is what you were on, Dad, yes. Yeah, this is what we did.
The veterans that come here make this what it is. The people who come here make it what it is. If it wasn't for them, it's just a boat. But you get these vets out, they get a chance to kind of feel like they're back somewhere that they were proud to be, and they start sharing their story. It really just makes you realize it's all about them. I'm just proud to be part of it. Proud to be a misfit, leading the misfits.
The 21st century poses new threats, but riverine forces are still as important as ever. At a U.S. Navy base in Virginia, a high-tech 21st century training session is about to begin. These sailors are part of the Maritime Expeditionary Security Force, or MESF. Their job? Protecting ports, river estuaries, and inland waterways around the world.
What you're seeing on the screens, it's a lot like your simulator rides at theme parks, except for it's 360 degrees and the environment around you reacts to what it gets as input from the actual boat. So however you drive the boat is what you're going to see on the screens. There's recoil on the screens. When you fire, you actually see splashes. You see reactions in the targets.
Training has changed since the days of the Brown Water Navy in Vietnam.
Before there were simulators, there was a lot of walking around, talking through things, pulling out wood cutouts of boats and moving them around on the tabletop to kind of show how you would interact in a scenario. This just opens up a whole new world to us where we can actually plug in things that react to how you approach them.
This command is typically all about train how you fight. So every time you come to work, this is what we do. The hardest part is maintaining your stance, gravity. Make sure you have a proper control of the weapon, making sure that your muzzle is pointed down range at the right things, and just maintaining that control.
Great. This is about as real world as we can get without making it rain in here.
But they still have to get out on the water in one of the key vessels in the MESF armory. The 34-foot patrol boat. The 34-foot patrol boat is a grandchild of the Vietnam PBRs, but it's better armed and tougher.
The hull of those boats, when they get on step, could have a draft of about 3 inches is all they needed. So those boats were built for that. These boats, the 34-foot patrol boats, are made to be a little bit more durable, a little bit deeper water, have the space, weight, and power to ensure that they can get up on step quickly, that they can not only utilize the weapon systems on the boats, but they can utilize the boat as a weapon system to shoulder threats away if they need to.
The patrol boat is small, but packs a punch.
Typically we have 2 long-range weapons, which are 50 cal machine guns. Those are what we use to reach out further context. Those are usually aft and forward. Then we have a little medium machine gun. It's a 7.62 weapon. It's on port and starboard side. And those are used for more closer context. Then every person on the boat is also equipped with small arms weapons, whether that be an M4 or a 9mm pistol.
We have weapons pointing in all directions, basically, and are able to maneuver quick enough and precise enough to put guns exactly where I need them to be.
One of the main roles of the MESF is to protect larger U.S. combat ships in harbors and river estuaries. the point they are most vulnerable.
A United States Navy warship has an incredible capability to project power and be lethal. But when they come into a port, they're restricted in their ability to maneuver, and they're unable to utilize that firepower to protect themselves. So the role of the Maritime Expeditionary Security Force is to push those threats away from the skin of the ship so that that first line of defense is not right there at the skin of the ship. That first line of defense is some distance away that allows us to counter the threats as they come in.
The vulnerability of warships in rivers and harbors became very real on October 12, 2000. The destroyer USS Cole was attacked in the port of Aden, on the coast of Yemen. Suicide bombers on a small barge, packed with over 400 pounds of explosives, tore a massive hole in the Cole's side. 17 sailors were killed, and 39 were wounded.
We mourn their loss, celebrate their lives, offer the love and prayers of a grateful nation to their families.
Every one of our adversaries, whether they're a non-state actor, whether it's a state-sponsored terrorist organization, or whether it's a state asymmetric capability like our special forces would be, that they have those same kind of maritime threats, small boat threats, divers that can attack that ship.
Inbound small craft. You are approaching a coalition warship operating in international waters. Request you alter course immediately to remain clear.
And without these sailors on their boats ensuring that water's safe, then they can't rearm, they can't resupply, we can't get the ships back into the fight again. So that's why MESF is around.
Identify yourself and state your intentions.
I had an interesting conversation with a Marine Corps general friend of mine who said, you know, if you sneeze on a globe, that's where MESF is. So these ships can be anywhere in the world and pull into port, and they will know that they have a trained sailor right there making sure that they are going to be safe while they rearm, resupply, refit, and get back into the fight.
Tyler, warning shot. Warning shot on.
MESF crews are small but close-knit.
You become family. And so as long as I have their six and they have my six and we're communicating very clear and very loud and making sure, hey, he's coming up on your left, he's coming up on your right, he's coming up on your starboard, your port. As long as that communication key piece is still there, then we're gonna make it home every day.
The MESF see themselves as continuing the traditions of the PBRs in Vietnam. For their commanding officer, the tradition dates back to the Revolutionary War.
Have you ever seen the picture of George Washington crossing the Delaware? The boat that he is on is a Durham boat that was out of the Marblehead Regiment in Massachusetts. A guy named John Glover that owned a fishing fleet, owned these Durham boats, and utilized them at first to do just what these guys do: protect the sea lanes of communication, protect the high-value unit assets. So that battle across the Delaware River turned the tide in the Revolutionary War in many ways. So the freedoms that we enjoy today are in no small part due to the legacy of these boats and these sailors that are still operating around the world.
River raiders have liberated, fought cat-and-mouse battles with an unseen enemy, and still serve to protect the combat fleet. What these raiders lack in size, they make up for in speed, skill, and firepower.